And some people are celebrating this and calling it justice. I have a different point of view, and let me break it down. George Floyd, an African-American male, unarmed, should be alive today, but he was killed. He was killed because of an out-of-control police officer who was protected by a mob of other cops. Now, if they did not have a badge and a gun, this would be considered gang activity. And they would have had the gang aggravator to enhance their sentence given the crime that was committed. But because this person had a gun and a badge, there seems to be a level of indoctrination. You still have individuals saying that George Floyd died because of a drug overdose, contrary to the evidence, contrary to the testimony of experts. Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years. The minimum, or excuse me, the guideline was 12.5 years. The prosecution, they requested 30 years. The maximum was 40 years. If you ran it concurrent, now you're talking about 70 years. So it's a whole lot of years here that you're dealing with. But he received 22 years and 6 months. Let me tell you why I'm not celebrating this as a victory for justice. Now, should he go to jail? Of course he should go to jail. I think he should have received the maximum. And I'm not saying this based on emotion. I'm saying this based on the aggravating factors surrounding the crime. He did this in front of children. He did this in front of a community. How many people you know that can commit cold blood in front of children and they do not get the maximum sentence? I want you to think about this in another term. I want you to consider that this person was not a police officer. I want you to think about it this way. Let's say Derek Chauvin was just a white man who decided to kill a black man because of a confrontation. And he did so with the protection of his 3 friends who stopped anybody from stopping him from doing this murder. And he slowly choked the life with his knee out of the soul of this black man in front of everybody, children, the community, a first responder. And he did this, and it was caught on video, and it was egregious. And it shocked the conscience of everybody that a white man woke up one morning and killed an unarmed black man that should be alive today in front of everybody in that community on video. Slow death as this black man cried out for his deceased mother. You and I would all say this should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, period. But because he has a badge and a gun, we allow a judge to say 22.5 years is enough. Let me remind you of what Chauvin said right before the sentencing.
I do want to give my condolences to the Floyd family. There's going to be some other information in the future that would be of interest, and I hope things will give you some peace of mind. Thank you.
First of all, damn your condolences. Condolences? You don't even apologize for committing murder, for taking an entire person away out of a family. No. And then you say something cryptic like you're about to launch another defense. And I do believe that his wording was about launching some defense in the future. And then you told the family you hope it gives them some peace. The hell is wrong with this man? If that doesn't convince you that he has no remorse for what he's done, I want to remind you of a little girl who would never be able to have her dad help her brush her teeth.
What do you miss most about your daddy?
Well, I ask about him all the time. And that's kind of it.
Yeah. Well, when you ask about him, what are you asking about?
Well, I was asking, how did my dad get hurt?
Do you wish that he was still here with us?
Yeah, but he is.
Through his spirit?
Yes.
Yes. And when you see your daddy again one day, what do you want to do when you see him?
I want to play with him.
What kind of games do you want to play with them?
I wanna play with him, have fun, go on a plane ride, and that's it.
Yeah.
We used to have dinner meals every single night before we went to bed. My daddy always used to help me brush my teeth.
You see, if you're not broken up by that, it's because you have no heart. For those of us who do have a heart, that's hard to watch. I saw it for the first time on Friday. It doesn't get easier to see that. That is the impact of a murderer named Derek Chauvin. Now there is some legislative victory out of this, a small victory. Top Democrats and Republicans in the state legislature said while not every aspect of the public safety and judiciary budget bill is finalized, they've reached a compromise on key parts. The agreement includes creating a police misconduct database to be able to detect and keep bad officers off the streets, regulating the use of no-knock warrants, and creating offices or task forces to look into missing or murdered Indigenous and Black women, according to CARE 11. It took this in order for us to have some common sense legislation that we need to keep tabs on bad cops. I mean, cops know your record. Why can't you know the cops' record? To talk more about this, I have on the show none other than civil rights attorney extraordinaire, Mr. Charles F. Coleman Jr. Charles, thank you for being on Indisputable.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Really glad to be here.
Glad to have you. I know you followed this case up and down, in and out. You saw the verdict, you saw the sentencing, you saw the cryptic and ridiculous response of Chauvin before the sentencing. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, it's interesting because one of the things that sometimes people forget is that I'm actually a former prosecutor as well. So when I'm processing these cases, when I'm looking at how the case was presented, the verdict, the sentencing, I'm looking at it both from the lens of how I would have tried the case as a prosecutor, what I would have asked for, and then ultimately what I think was fair as someone who has defended people in court as well. And what I will say is I do think that the prosecution did the right thing in terms of what the book says when you ask for 30 years and not the maximum. And the reason for that is because you do want to create some level of consistency and some level of precedent. And because of the lack of a criminal record prior to this incident, it would have been inconsistent for them to ask for the maximum in this case, despite the fact that many of us may feel it was warranted. Now, at the same time that I say that, I have no problem acknowledging that one of the most aggravating factors here that I think prosecutors could have gone for more than the 30 years that they asked for was the egregious breach of the public trust that is involved when police officers abuse their power. There were 4 different aggravating factors that the judge cited in terms of what the prosecutors had put before him, and 2 of them were things that he considered. One of them was, as you've already mentioned, there were children who were present. There were minors who were present for this unfortunate and terrible, heinous act of murder in the middle of the day on video. A minor as old as 17 and as young as 9. And second, there was a significant breach of abusing power, the abuse of power that comes with being an officer of the law and what is required there, and the responsibility that you have and the amount of trust that is placed in you by the public. And so from my standpoint, I think that would have warranted a greater sentence than what it is that he received. I also think that even as we lament the fact that he did not receive additional time, when put into context, this frames what is essentially the problem with the level of carte blanche that police officers receive across this country. And even though we're talking about the execution of their duties or within the execution of their duties, I want to put something in perspective. Derek Chauvin was sentenced to 22 and a half years for the top count of second-degree murder. The average civilian who is doing non-federal time for the same time is sentenced and serving almost double that at about 40 years and some change.
Wow, that's perspective.
So for as much as we want to have this conversation and say, well, this is a step in the right direction, this is moving in the right direction, it doesn't, in my opinion, discourage police who are determined to abuse their power any more than this policing act will, or anything of that nature, because there's still such a huge disparity in terms of how civilians are treated, as you illuminated, talking about how Derek Chauvin would have been treated by this legal system were it not for the fact that he had a badge and a gun and was a police officer, as compared to civilians. And so I think it's critical that we maintain that level of context and understanding around this entire situation.
Very good point, very good point. And when the prosecutor requested additional time, they cited many of those elements that the judge talked about, including the violation of the public trust. It was done in front of children, et cetera. But I also want to remind people, because if you're saying that this is justice, I want to remind everyone that while the sentencing says 22 and a half years, he is likely to serve roughly 13 years because he's up for probation in 15 years. And then he also received credit for time served. So now you're looking at really a 13-year jail stint if everything goes along with the sentencing mandate and there's no appeal that gets him out any sooner. He is still facing federal charges. That is a separate case, but we'll keep our eyes on that.